Hello everyone, we're back, and for this video we're going to be talking about establishing mood in the picture. And there are a number of ways that mood can be developed in an illustration. One is any object disappearing into mist, either up in the air, going down towards the ground, or going off into the distance. An overall gray tone is moody. A distant light in the dark, not necessarily midnight or anything, but just any distant light in the dark. A silhouette in the fog, mist, or smog. A single light in an otherwise dark building. Light from around a corner. Light from underwater. Light through slits from behind or under a door. An out of place object partly buried or submerged. Anything out of place in general. Obviously light and shadow have a lot to do with making that impact greater. A shadow on a tent or fabric from behind. Series of objects most effectively if hazed or silhouetted that form the somewhat sinister shape, such as teeth, skull, something like that. One of those odd, sinister looking silhouettes. Dim shapes or lights in the rain. Dim shapes or lights in the rain. Shadows from out of frame, and the shadow from out of the frame can sometimes be very frightening or just slightly mysterious. Trails or tracks of any kind. A light from behind a silhouetted hill. Those are some of the ways. The first example that we have of mood being created is roughly the lights in the dark. And we have a deeply wooded scene. You can see the sky doesn't have to be black to be dark. It's a pool of water in the foreground, a little bit of a reflection of the sky, and just a trace of the reflection of the lights from the flashlights. And that's correct because it's the distance from the light source to the water. So you just get a little kiss of it over the edge of the shore. But this is always a successful way of creating mood. It's used in the movies constantly, and it'll be back some more. So we'll move on to the next one. This is an example of a sinister shadow in the haze, smoke, fog. In this particular case, smoke, and a couple of totally shocked soldiers, and they are the darkest thing in the picture. The tank is a shadowed silhouette, and it's one of those cases where the shadow of the silhouette rather of the tank is one that would have to be, in the final analysis, very carefully generated to get the maximum impact. In this picture, we've got all the darks, the real darks in the foreground. And this fence line with the barbed wire, you notice the way it starts out very dark and gradually lightens as it goes down into the smoke and haze. So anyway, this is one of those examples I gave you. This one, a shadow from outside of the picture that is certainly sinister, but we can't quite identify it. We have these two people in this tunnel of sorts, and they're cautious, but thus far totally unaware of the shadow itself. So they'd be going the other way very fast. What we have here is basically a backwards C composition, you know, as the motif, and this is one of those things where inventing the scene from your head is better than trying to find reference on figures that are doing precisely what you want. That's almost impossible to pull off. This one was, with all apologies to the original King Kong, it's a tried and tested technique as well, where we have this seemingly unaware group of men on a raft in the fog, and we have this giant serpent misty shape in the background coming in and out of the water. Prehistoric bird. The trees are soft, fuzzy, hazed out. And we have lost all identification with the surface here. So you notice that it goes from a light gray through nothing to near white. And that's one of the ways that you establish a decent foggy effect. And this also is an example of that first thing that I said that could generate mood, and that was any object that disappears into the fog mist, either going up or going down. So it could be the top of a tall building, could be the bottom of a tall building. In this case, the bottom of a serpent or a large snake of some kind. That's the general rule, and it works really well for things that disappear off into the distance too. I have an example of that a little bit later on. This would basically be qualified as a grouped mass, which is this little grouping of figures. Everything else is considered background on that. This is another one that can create mood, is a sense of things being terribly out of scale. You have this this enormous setting sun, and just a few thin stripes of haze across it, and this herd of animals moving quickly by, almost as if it was in a dream or a nightmare. And well, the fact that we really didn't draw any animals. There's like a head recognizable here, one here, a couple of giraffes here, one giraffe over there. The rest is just baloney. And yet it still looks like a herd of animals, thanks to the uniqueness of the giraffe's silhouette. And that reinforces my earlier comments about the fact that we recognize things according to their silhouette. As far as this composition goes, it's basically just plain horizontals with a little bit of vertical against horizontal playing against it. The shape of this tree, one of the acacia trees, it's been pruned up to size by local animals, is a really energetic shape that, because of the haze of the sun, the glare rather of the sun, the shape moves us into the picture and along with the herd of animals and tends to accelerate the whole thing. So we have this shape of foliage, and the dark foliage in the foreground quickly going to light, back to dark, back to light. So we've got the light, dark, light thing running per as usual. This is another standard theme, which is number one is we've got the foggy issue. Number two, we have isolation and loneliness, a single light source in the dark. We have the what could easily be developed into ominous silhouettes of the trees in the surrounding area, and everything is not comforting, to say the least, in the picture. So we've by letting the light diffuse, and oftentimes you can mostly for technique when you're doing this sort of thing, you erase clearly the cone of the light, and then you wipe your finger through some of the graphite, and you just kind of lightly dust it, and then come back and just dab at the light, and you get that. Then you can chirp out these little accents with the kneaded eraser as well. So if you have to deal with that, that's the way that's done. Move along. This is an obvious case of something being enormously out of scale once again, except this time it's a almost laughable mountain troll sort of creature. And we have for scale our running figures here at the edge of the water, and he's blithely brushing trees aside and things in the picture. But it's another way to create mood, albeit a frightening mood at this point. And so at this point you would take your character and really start to develop it fully, because it's really just a very nominal development at this point. But it's definitely a Steelyard composition with a monstrous subject and then a small balancing effect at the bottom, which creates the tension that we're after in the scene. So, okay, this is things again dissolving into the fog, and we have basically a 3-spot composition here. And the building in the background is just kind of a generic, mysterious Gothic sort of building. No real trace of what's going on, but the lights in the dark again, and the dissolving. So here we've combined 2 of the idioms into one. This one is it's that early morning vanishing mist kind of look, which is largely accomplished in this case and of course the cemetery creates a certain amount of mood on its own, but we drag the shadows with our finger rubbed through the graphite rather than penciling in hard shadows. Soft shadows are more indicative of a disappearing fog, so and they tend to radiate from the direction of the light source, so instead of all coming parallel over the hill, they are acting in perspective like they should. Let's see, I guess probably the most important part in this picture was to keep the sky simple, because the foreground is incredibly complex, and we got to be very careful in this that we kind of mix and match these monuments here to different scales, shapes, and sizes, so that we get sufficient variety to carry the day. But the soft, foggy atmosphere is the mood item. This is one where you have actually generated a feeling amongst the foliage, that the foliage is participating in. It's almost, you've seen that in old Disney movies like the one about Sleepy Hollow, where the foliage seems to come to life and be a partner in the crime with whatever they're afraid of or running from. So you can actually, and the whole overall feeling of this particular composition is called pattern. And so that's another way. This is tried, tested, and true. Anytime you have a limited avenue of escape down through the middle of a picture and you block it off with something semi-ominous, you have an automatic, it really works. It's the best device. It could be a live human, it could be an animal, it could be something other than animal, something paranormal, or in this case a scarecrow with a pumpkin head on it. The idea here was to create a kind of a breezy, blowing kind of effect among the trees and to channel our center of interest down the middle. And I think that that really happens here. It's a good approach. Okay, this is something clearly ominous in the tree above these little trick-or-treaters. One street light, just radiating some soft light from them, and this nameless horror in the tree here. And all the rest can be in, you can put all the rest of the story together all on your own, but this was a fun little thing to create, and it's kind of a Steelyard as well, or you could call it a 3-spot, but I think it's like this Steelyard with this big thing and these 2 little shapes that are really kind of a pair down below. And the fact that we are above the, when you remember what I mentioned earlier in the last video, that if your vantage point is extremely low or extremely high, either, you become an observer. So we're high here, we are an observer, not a participant. So we are witnesses to this thing. Trying to generate your shape, that's an article for another time and another topic, trying to generate characters. But the most important part with anything like this is that this feels like a mass whole around here, and seems to, and points its way towards, in all ways, everything points towards the prey below. So that's what you're usually looking for. And again, we avoided the corners so that we don't get anything creeping out back there. This is always a good solution, to have rays of light coming through from source unknown in a place that is desperately lacking in light. And in this case, just a giant storm sewer. And we have a couple of people here, basically at the lower third quadrant, where the a third, right about in here is where we want them to be, and right about that third is where the light source is emanating from. So these diagonal lines here, volumetrics always intriguingly spooky. And there's a little ladder here, which you can barely see, that goes up and out of this place. Basically, our composition is radiating lines, in all cases, vanishing point being right about there. And we don't see the end of the tunnel. We want to lose that. There's some water standing in the bottom here, little token reflection of the light that's coming down, and just some basic circular forms to maintain the integrity of the shape. But beyond that, radiating lines. This one is like a single light in a dark building. I've got some new examples of these things that are done as a follow-on to this. This was the original series that I put together a couple of years ago. In this particular case, we got a couple of things working for us. And this is one of those cases where you recall the discussions about arbitrary and committing lines. So in this particular case, we have to do one here and one like over here to establish a grid for perspective, the way this is going to sweep through the picture. Then once that's done, we need to make another arbitrary decision, which is one of these lines. And then we have to do a second in that category. Since we haven't established any horizon line, we're going to have to use a second line to establish where that point might be. And then we construct the thing from then on. We have one at the top and one off to the right. The one on the left, we can at some point you kind of guess at these things. You kind of turn your triangle around until it feels like it's a 90-degree corner. And you use that as your pilot line and work on from there. But beyond that now, we have a little bit of light coming in from the left, really soft light, just a touch on everything. And we have this soaring monument of stuff, and the light is way high above us, which makes us, we're very low, so we're an observer. But at the same time, we're like witness to something really ominous. And where a light in a cabin can seem charming, a light in a castle like this seems the opposite, which seems threatening. So now we have a little bit of landform coming down behind, roughly balancing with this, and obviously against that. And on the other side, we have a little bit coming down this way to balance the other action. So we have this V in the middle from the surrounding terrain. And then we've got this collar of trees around the bottom here, which break up the silhouette and let it come and go. And the appearance of stairways that go up to get into the building. It looks pretty unattainable, so that has a mood all its own. This one is one where you let weather and a little bit of Gothic architecture do all the hard work for you, and even though there appears to be a light on in the building, it's not much comfort, and mostly lightning storm and wrought iron, and it's definitely the Addams family all the way. And just darkness with some natural weather phenomenon can often create terrific mood. We got a little bit of soft light coming in from the right-hand side here. You can see it sneaking down the side of the building, and from the lightning a little bit across the top of this pop out here, so that we're getting a little bit of stuff and some little quickie drawn wrought iron work that doesn't really have to make, you don't have to do much design in a job like this. It's mostly a dark silhouette. So it was a fairly simple thing to concoct. Okay, here's where this is the new series, really simple stuff. And this was one where anything that disappears into the mist vertically. So this is one of those, where these two fellows here coming back to the castle. You got this little bird here, which is just kind of a balancing element. And there's always something kind of, in those kind of movies, there's always something a little bit ominous about, a hawk or eagle flying around. So we've got this this foil object foreground, including the two men, that's all dark, and a couple of leafless trees, and which is appropriate to the subject here. Anything too lush kind of kills the mood, so you want to leave some leafless snags there in the picture to carry the day. Okay. This is an example of anything out of place and half buried or half submerged. So it's both of those things. We have, again, a dark foil object foreground, which is the shore. Distant headland back here with a little bit of reflection. Very quiet water, no horizon apparent. So that's always a little bit moodier when you lose the horizon. Had a lot of trouble drawing this airplane as a sunken element. So what I ended up doing was drawing the entire airplane on another piece of paper and then erasing off part of it once I got done, because it's really hard to estimate. And then once I had the complete plane with some of it erased, then I slid it around over the top. I was done on a piece of tracing paper, slid it around over the top of the drawing till I figured out where it looked really the best in the picture. Because I didn't want this over this, and I didn't want to get tangled up in these things growing in the foreground, and wanted to stay as close as I could to a third in. So I brought it in, then slipped it underneath and retraced the thing, and we've got very simple shadows on it, very simple reflections. I get this one strut that holds up the one wing, which is going into the water and then creating a little thing. So that little strut there, that was part of having drawn the entire airplane. So many times it's best to draw the complete object because you get a better sense of proportion that way. When you leave one wing off, it's hard to judge where everything should be. And then a little bit of kneaded eraser lift out in here. Want to be very careful in a situation like this to keep the distant land very grayed and hazed back. So anyway, that's a good example of something half buried or submerged. This is something out of place. It may seem silly, and we could put anything on the sign. I just used a speed limit sign because it seemed doubly absurd. So all we basically have here is a series of lines that run across the page in funny random zigzag ways, and then insert an artificial item into the middle of all of this mix. I want you to also note that the direction of the shadows is this way, so it's running off the page this way. When you do the mountains in the distance to create a little additional layer of mystery, you can let it haze out as it approaches as it passes behind the nearer hill. That always works, and it actually does happen a lot. So it's a real true thing. So a scattering of plants back here, just enough to, and this is roughly on the 1/3 line again. So that's something out of place to create a mood. This is an example of some rocks that together and in the haze form something sinister like a set of teeth. Almost. I didn't want to make it too obvious because that would be, like having the upper jaw as well. That would be just plain silly. But just enough. And any other object that you can think of that's mildly sinister, something like tentacles or anything, anything that comes to your mind. Foreground is again one of these, a framing foil object of dark to which the two viewers here are a part of. So they are totally enveloped in shadow, just like the foreground is. And here again we let the darks fade away to light as they pass, and that gives us the double advantage of making our second center of interest, if you please. It's hard to say which one you want. It's probably this first and that second, but you tend to linger. You're going to tend to linger longer there, I believe. And so then the next one is another hill in the background behind that to kind of counter this downhill run a little bit. And it again goes from darker to lighter, but very, very grayed back. You you can have a lot of fun with this. You know, I mean, I think anybody that saw the latest, the last version of King Kong would remember the island they went to, Skull Island or whatever. This is lights. What was it? I'm trying to remember what. It's a gray picture with gray shapes and lights in the rain, basically. So that always establishes a mood. And when we add this figure, we get a double dose. In this particular picture, the first thing to do was this line right here, and then the horizon line. And so that was an arbitrary, and that was a commitment. So then once we have that, we've got our perspective. So then you can get this and everything else in the picture that you need. The next was to sweep this T shape for the bridge across. Then later add a second column on the far side, bring it down and bring the reflections down and everything. So it's a step by step. These were all pulled out with a kneaded eraser. This was kind of a London-esque sort of scene. Just enough skyline in the background to give it a little personality. I decided to go with just a simple shoreline of trees on the other side. That would be a little bit better. And then little things like right here, there's a kneaded eraser drag across here to drop a reflection of that light. All of these posts, they have little reflections as well. So reflections and the effect of rain is a very, very powerful tool, and it works exceptionally well. Now this was, we got the Grim Reaper, his shadow on the wall here. You remember a while back I had a Bad Cowboy. I decided to do something a little bit more recognizable this go around. And so basically here was a case where we had those two lines that we have to form to find the vanishing point. Then we can build the rest of the walls, and everything sort of falls into position. A gap here, a gap at the end, a shadow of this wall on the wall, the shadow of this wall over here. So we got these basically horizontals and verticals and radiating lines. We have a lot of different motifs all playing together at the same time. But this character could just as easily be an ordinary man. I only picked this so that it would jump out a little bit more. Any shadow of any figure is immediately mysterious and moody. So it's always a great device. Okay, this is any kind of track or trail. You remember I mentioned that one. And a couple of things occurred to me. I wanted it to be in the snow. I figured that would be outside of a beach. That's about the best place to leave tracks. So I swept this really quiet shadow from some, not a dark shadow, but a light one from some trees across the picture, so that the area that we would really concentrate on would be right in here in this narrow zone in the middle, and especially where the whites are. So put in a dark background here to silhouette the building, and some of the foreground steps. No special care taken in doing these footprints in the snow, because we really don't know what made them in the first place. One of the things that tends to add to the total effect of the thing is the fact that the door has remained open. And that seemed like a good idea to me at the time. This right up in here should have really been a little darker. It's the shadow of the snow overhanging the roof here. But we've got, you know, it's not really an S, but it is. You know, anytime you do a little swerving path like that, good solution to the problem. But the tracks are the key to generating the mood. This is an example of a bright light from behind a silhouetted form, like an edge of a hill or something, and to add a little bit of extra drama to it, some radiating rays of light here, so that it doesn't look like it's just the glow of San Fernando Valley or something in the distance. Punching a couple of holes in the trees here too that almost seem like skull eyes or something like that. They take on a new kind of feeling about them, and having their lights, the fact that the lights are radiating a lot more than they really should, just with simple perspective, indicates that the bright light that is causing this mystery is a lot closer than we think. And so anyway, it's a good little device, and a simple glow from behind a hill that's otherwise a very dark landscape. It even works better if the landscape is, if the portion that's lit is maybe only that wide in an otherwise dark landscape. So I mean, this works okay, but the other will work just as well and just be a slight brightening of the area. And people say, what is that from? Okay, this is a case of something disappearing into the mist horizontally. So this kind of takes you back sort of to the last Jurassic Park, something like that, where that they were in the bird cage. Anyway, we have a foreground foil object to which the rope bridge belongs. And the first part of it's as dark as the environment. It quickly fades away to nothing there. It was really quite a simple thing to do. Keeping this up way high tends to make the whole thing look a little bit more precipitous and a little tiny bit scarier. So that worked pretty well, I think. This is generally gray. This is moody. And so this is just a kind of a, I'm not sure what period I guess it's not really Lord of the Rings, but it could fit in that period. And it's got the same kind of strange little roof shapes and characteristics. And here we have a dark foreground shape which contains a smoke jack, some ragged picket fencing material, an eave of another house, another smoke jack. So that's zone number one. Zone number two is this piece here coming up into this. And zone number three is this one back here and back here. And so you just keep getting generally just a little bit grayer. But you don't need to do anything particularly spooky. A little bit of light coming from right in here, which is just to add a little bit of something going on that you can't quite identify that would... and I didn't want to do the cliche light window or anything like that. So that was the thinking process behind that little guy. These kind of exercises are marvelous things to stretch your imagination ability, which is unfortunately one of the things that almost nobody uses is imagination when they come up with a problem. And it's really fun stuff to do. Here we really have, this is the simplest picture ever made. Just a dark foreground, medium middle ground, light background, and one light. No clues other than that. The trick here was just to create an asymmetrical, interesting edged pattern and let it go at that. So this light could be happening anywhere and it would work equally well. Okay. This is a shape in the fog, mist, or smog. In this case, I went for a dragon of some kind, obviously. We do not want to see the bottom of him. You can get a little bit darker at the top, but you want it to quickly go away, and you just want a few key elements to hang on. So the ground is very little darker than the sky, and there's absolutely no trace of a horizon. Or maybe a tiny bit here, but it's more like the top of a hill than a horizon. Everything's really basically lost on the left-hand side. So you really don't, all you need is a charming silhouette in this kind of a situation. And if you were to put a couple of dark figures in the foreground, it could quickly become really scary, as if that isn't enough. Is there any single light in it's mystery, but not necessarily scary mystery. We've got a very complicated foreground here with a very edgy described silhouette. And so we want to keep the sky very, very simple in this thing. And I had this house just go off the page here and drop this little light into it. It seemed like it felt more like part of the foreground and part of the environment with it going off the page. We got a few dead pine in there to add, which always adds a little air of mystery to things, you know, when there's a few snaggy things. If everything's a little bit too lush and green and growing happy, it just kind of takes all the fun out of the thing. So you can see that there really is no complicated effect to doing these pine trees. They're really just little simple single pencil strokes. This is any light from around a corner. When you have any kind of a surprise lighting system. Now what I did here was I bent 3-point perspective in here so that everything's kind of leaning in towards the top to create a little additional excitement. If you do all these things just dead vertical, not much interest in it. You really have to almost kind of go Disney cartoon to start to get the effect that you're after. And the desire for this to look like it's going over a hill on top of it all. So we have buildings that are stair-stepping down and a phone line with some dreary sagging lines on it, as well as a little bit of extra light over the edge. Fire escape up here, all the usual fare. But this little this leak of light out of the door, that's your mood giver. No other lights on in the picture in any of the buildings. So this is light from underwater, which has always been kind of spooky to me. And so what I did here is I really seriously tilted the horizon and the perspective and made it 3-point on top of it all to get us in a kind of a crazy attitude towards the water. And here you would do a couple of lines to set the tone of your perspective. The first would be arbitrary and the second one would set the perspective completely. Most of this was done with kneaded eraser lift out, a couple of little very light wave-like lines over the top to give it a surface for it to shine up through. Just some lines in the decking and not too much else. It's a very focal hot spot of light in the picture. Not the easiest thing to do, but there are a world of great possibilities in lighting from underwater to make people scared and scary. This is any slits in any material. It's an old board fence in this particular example, and it does the job fairly decently. Okay, I'm gonna hit this one next. This was a spot in the dark, a spot of light in the dark, and I was trying to think of the most unlikely place where that could occur, and I decided that a floating iceberg and some pack ice in the foreground, really dark, and a searchlight shining straight up, which seemed like the most unlikely of all possible events in that situation. And so gave it a swing, and I found a piece of reference and then put it away as quickly as I could of an iceberg that was floating in sort of a foggy mist in the distance. And that seemed like the really unusual view of an iceberg I had never seen before. Most of these little shapes, you have to be extremely careful to get them scattered in the right way throughout the picture, and they get dimmer as they go back into that soup. And then you just use a little chip with the side of the pencil to add some of these little details to give them a little bit of form. But they basically have flat bottoms, and we got some dark and light striping in the water here, which this is from studying some photographs, then putting it away. The darker parts are the parts that are not frozen over with any skim ice, and the lighter portions have some of that on them, a little bit of floating thin ice. So all of that stuff adds to the truth of the day. And let's see, I need to I think we need to set up a drawing pad to do the next item. Okay, so we'll be back with you in just a moment as soon as we get that set up, and I'll finally do a drawing for you.